What do you do as the CEO of a company when your stock tanks over 60% from its all-time high? That's right, you freeze hiring and start doing layoffs, which is exactly what Mark Zuckerberg is doing at Meta right now. The story begins in July of 2022 when he stated on an internal conference call, "Part of my hope by raising expectations and having more aggressive goals and just kind of turning up the heat a little bit is that I think some of you might decide that this place isn't for you and that self-selection is okay with me. Realistically, there are probably a bunch of people at the company who shouldn't be here." Companies go through periods of mass hiring and firing all the time, especially when they're publicly traded. This is, however, not your usual company, and these are not the usual times. We'll get to the part where I talk about how Facebook should handle the situation, but first, some background. Meta's stock price started off this year close to the top at $338 and is currently bleeding out at around $140. This would panic investors and other stakeholders at the company, and of course this means enormous pressure on Zuckerberg to turn things around. When executives are faced with this kind of situation, the most common course of action is to reduce costs, whether or not it makes any sense to do so. It's not unusual to hear about a company doing layoffs even during profitable times, with the only justification being to satisfy shareholders by making the quarterly financial statements look good. This can come at the cost of making any prospect of how things are going to be beyond the current quarter worse overall, even if the people getting laid off are the so-called bottom 10%. I mean, think about it, right? Anytime people see their coworkers getting laid off en masse without any personal blunders, morale takes a huge hit. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at who's actually getting fired. So far, it's nobody. Current plans state a reduced hiring effort from about 10,000 engineers this year to around 6,000 or 7,000. In addition to reducing hiring, he said, the company was leaving certain positions unfilled in response to attrition and turning up the heat on performance management to weed out the staffers unable to meet more aggressive goals. This actually sounds quite fair. Times are tough, so people need to buckle up and keep the ship afloat with less slack. Relying on attrition to reduce headcount is preferable to outright firing people. Setting higher performance goals for people to meet when the company isn't doing well overall is the right thing to do. But there is a small problem though. While there may be some slackers as with any company, if we're looking at the dollar cost of who's burning the most money, we have to look up, not down. Facebook, while it's losing users to other social networks, is still a profitable company. The real losses, of course, are found in the money pit that is the metaverse, which is currently losing around $1 billion a month. With Meta having committed to burning another $10 billion over the next decade. This is an obscene amount of money to waste on what's really a hyper-commercialized me-verse. Which brings us to whom to blame for these 11-figure losses: Mark Zuckerberg. Only someone who is completely out of touch with society, gaming, and humans in general. Someone with the power to command a large cap corporation with over 70,000 employees that's worth several $100 billion. To waste all their time and energy would be capable of wasting that amount of money on a project so useless at best and dystopian at worst. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't get rid of all the slackers, but in the real world, there are people who contribute nothing, and then there are people whose contribution is in the red. Fire the one with the negative $13 billion ROI first, not the other guys. He'll make more than that back when the stock recovers eventually as a result of not wasting money on a Second Life clone. But part two, except of course that this is impossible. Zuckerberg may only own around 12% of the company he founded in 2004, but he's still in possession of over 50% of the voting power. See, when you start a company and eventually get to the point where you wish to grow the company beyond what it can financially support, you either take out a loan or get investors to buy a portion of your company. In the world of Silicon Silicon Valley, even though the company was started in Cambridge. They did move over to Silicon Valley later, but that's another story. It is the latter that is the most common. And there are countless stories where the founders give up controlling amounts of shares of their companies only to get forced out at the earliest convenience of the board. For this, of course, there is a solution that our very creative financial sector in the United States has come up with, and people like Mark Zuckerberg like to take advantage of course. And the solution is different classes of shares: voting shares, non-voting shares, shares with more votes than other shares. This is how Mark Zuckerberg retains control over his empire despite his minority state in the company. As the person who got the company where it is today in the first place, it's completely justifiable that he'd feel free to use the vast resources at his disposal to pursue a passion project, right? The problem is when nobody can hold him accountable, he does have the power to run the whole thing into the ground. He also has the power to fix things. That being said, it's not straightforward. Gutting the VR subsidiary would actually mean firing a whole bunch of people, which is what we're trying to not have the outcome be, of course. And it's certainly not as preferable a solution versus attrition. Maybe they can work on VR projects that have nothing to do with metaverse. Start an actual VR gaming division, as an example. Repurpose those staff to work on non-VR projects. The tech is new enough that I'd be surprised if a VR engineer also doesn't know how to work on some of the many other projects they have going on at Meta or even Facebook itself. While users are moving away from Facebook, the social network still has close to 3 billion monthly active users, and we don't really have mainstream alternatives that serve the same core purpose that Facebook does, which is connecting friends and families and seeing what they're up to. Facebook has an opportunity to invest in the future and put its people to work on figuring out what doing that actually looks like in the 2020s and beyond. That's it for this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and until next time, don't forget to actually hang out with your friends and family.